of this extreme inequality, which runs the growth process, the accumulation process, and then legitimizes it by saying, yes, they're very rich people, but Zuckerberg actually is a supporter of universal basic income. Oh, there's Bill Gates, but he gives money for health. That's a legitimation. That's a legitimation. But that's all this has brought up where we are at this point in time. So I think there needs to be a community thinking, where the community is one broader term, which is more societal than anything else. Finally, incidentally, doing this, I'm disturbed by, there'll be another time. I'm speaking, I find my name also in various places, so there'll be a chance. About the methodological individualism of the human development approach paradigm as we have received it and as it has evolved since 1990. And I find that one of the creates a blind spot. It creates a blind spot because it's actually individual-based. What are the choices? The choices are between this and this. It could be between butter and corn. It could be between guns and something. It could be between this and that. So you choose what you choose. It's my choice individually. How do I choose it? My indifference curve between one and the other. The framework for making choices about this. And of course, my choices should be widened, which means the production possibility curve should be shifted outwards. It's the same logical framework as the neoclassicals have used for defining welfare in terms of, and maximization of welfare. It is identical. There is hardly any difference except terminology. Now, beyond that, when the critique comes in, then of course, we make it plus, plus. And we say, no, there's also this, there's also that, there's also this. And so over the period of 20, 25 years, you find all kinds of additives to this framework, which tries, but it cannot get away from its core, which is methodological individualism. And so I think this is a very serious problem, because really what I'm arguing is that the problems don't come from the ability of individuals not to realize what is it that will improve their lives. I think I heard, was it Norbert who said that, but what if people don't know what it is that is better for them? I'm sorry, I think people know what's better for them. More choice, a bigger production possibility curve, more income. How do I get it? So the problem is not that they actually can't work out what their choices should be. The problem is that the choice set is too constrained. So just saying we should widen the choice set is to restate the obvious. I'm leaving out the adjective which starts with a B before the obvious, for that people can guess. Okay. Lastly, I've spoken as much as the speakers, but there were 4 of them, and they made very detailed presentations, so you'll forgive me. Lastly, the question of data and democracy. Again, a point picking up from Sten, one of my teachers in my MA, yeah, great man. He said, for instance, that in democratic societies, you don't have these sorts of problems. Data, and the Chinese famine as an example. Okay, put that aside. I just want to pick on the question of data. I think if you don't have data, which is reliable, which is timely, which is with all problems which you see in it, both in terms of method of collection, of interpretation, of unpleasant realities which are all of a sudden hit you in the face, but positive things as well. If we don't embrace that aspect, that approach to data, I think we are flying blind. Or at least the largest part of society is flying blind. The people who control the data may know more, but then it is a black box. That is not democracy. So now this is what Professor Sen has said, the famine happened in China because there was a black box around Mao and so on. But I think the same thing is happening in many other places as well, which always try to manipulate data, especially now that it is such a fluent, open two-way traffic between society and information. It's not worthwhile not having the data, especially when the data is, if it's working all well, that's great. But if it's not, it's an opportunity for actually doing something right. So I think in that sense, all the discussions which have been happening here about future indicators and how to go about it, whether I agree with something or not, I think are very valuable. And so if you, for instance, we saw from what Norbert Skari was saying, the number of countries which don't have those sort of reliable data sets. And we know from on the question of informality, now that's one way of doing it. But when you get bad news that, this indicator is not doing well or something going wrong here, well, publish it, and don't hold it back. The Chinese have stopped publishing data recently or they've held back on youth unemployment. I think they also fall into that category of being nervous about things. But I think it's a right of citizenship of people to know what is happening. Otherwise, they can't participate on any basis. So I think I would make that point very strongly here. Right, so where does it lead us in this? I think the criterion, is it human well-being at an individual level? To me, what I start thinking of more and more is, what's the end product? Again, you have endowments. They lead to entitlements. Of course, they go back into endowments. That leads to basic needs. Don't forget basic needs, where functionings and all these things started. It's another word for basic needs in some ways. They go back also into entitlements, however. That brings into well-being. You have all this combination leads to some form of well-being. How they're combined, individual. Well-being, it's a good well-being or no? Well-being, there must be happiness. Is this happiness? I don't know. The other side of the coin of happiness is doubt, being unhappy. So maybe wisdom is a better word, but something like that. Okay, identity figure somewhere or the other. So you can have all those kinds of things which come up. But to me, the essence of it all is an equal citizenship. That's what I would like to see in a society. Say, we want an equal citizenship. The aspects of governance, the aspect of access, the aspect of health and education, aspect of income, there has to be some fair framework. Now, what is a fair framework and what is a sense of justice is something which is a social thing to discuss for all. And this is an open discussion. And there will never be full agreement. That's normal. That's normal in any society. But I think an equal citizenship is what I would want to see. And then, of course, shortfalls from there leads us into process, into institutions and structures which are actually holding some things back or causing problems. I think if we solve those things upstream, then the downstream things, benefits will be, you will see outcomes which are actually the kind of outcomes we are trying to hope that they will actually be produced by this. So I think the measurement aspect to me is important, but it is actually not the engine for the change. The engine for the change lies somewhere else, much more upstream. And the upstream has gone a bit missing. We are looking at downstream indicators all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seth. You're touching upon of the public policy, limits of SNA, and especially the quality of society are really high points. And looking at the time, I can request for some questions at present. Yeah, yes, please. Mike, please. Kindly introduce yourself and to whom the question is addressed.
My name is R.B. Bhagat. I am former professor at the International Institute for Population. So my comment, or not comment, some of my thoughts to Rajiv Malhotra ji. It's very interesting to listen to you. And when you talk about social life, community, all these, whether the indicators will be at an individual level or a community level. So that brings to the point how to measure inequality or injustice. So one of the idea of Professor Sen was also there that to identify the injustice and how to reduce the injustice. So that is one thing, how to bring the concept of inequality, injustice in this measurement. The second is that capability. Is it a linear, or sometimes capability also declines? For example, we have skilling, but new technology comes, there is a de-skilling. So there is some sort of reduction in capability happens, and we have seen in history, whether in economic history or social history or political history, there has been rise, there has been golden period, and there has been dark period. It is also there in economic history. You have boom and depression. So this is, and lastly, that when we talk about inequality, and when we talk about capability, and capability defined in terms of development as freedom. So freedom, inequality are, I think, two things which are mutually reinforcing and creating barrier. But then the third factor also comes, fraternity, that the inclusion, what you are talking about, the social aspect. So these, I think, what is there in the preamble of our constitution, and looking the economics from sociological point of view, how it promotes fraternity, inclusion, and then that can be possible only when there is a reduction in
Thank you. Before I request Mr. Rajiv, further questions? Yes, please. Mic over there. Towards the end, over there. I'm told that this will be the last question.
Good evening. Thanks for
We
the
are standing
opportunity.
between you and tea. Yes, please.
Good evening, and thank you, panelists, for the very interesting and stimulating discussions. My name is Aishwarya Bhuta. I'm a PhD scholar from the United Kingdom. My question is very quick, and it is for Professor Malhotra. In your concluding remarks, you had mentioned about 3 models of human development, and you gave examples of 2 with Kerala and Himachal Pradesh. The third one, I think it would be nice to see if we can have examples of that, about how it can be probably largely market-driven, and if there is one, or probably how it would look like in practice. And that would be very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Yes, Mr. Rajiv, both questions are for you only.
I think one. Thank you. I think one was more of a comment than a question, but let me start with that. So I did discover that there were shades of the 3 drivers working on human development. I mentioned Himachal, where it was more publicly driven, a lot of public spending. That is also happening now in the Northeast, now, not earlier. But Northeast is also showing glimpses of human agency taking the society forward. If you go around Delhi or in any metropolitan areas, I just was in Bangalore, most of the retail shops are staffed from people from the Northeast. So that agency element is playing up. Market was a example in couple of states. It was not a very clear-cut example of market actually driving human development, but market supported by both the human agency as well as, so you see some states, Goa to some extent. Sikkim was also a kind of a more state-driven, but a little, so these are kind of not clear-cut categorizations. But the idea to take them up and to kind of highlight was that there is no unique way to get to the desired outcomes, human development outcomes, and there could be various drivers which would be relevant and should be taken note of, especially when we are looking at the whole issue of tracking and measuring human development.
Thank you. I think we don't have bandwidth to take more questions, so it was a great, I'm sorry. It was a great panel, and I'm grateful to all the panelists. Probably I should have been able to give a bit more of time, but maybe next time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
So we come to the third plenary of the pre-conclave events, which is Roundtable on Strengthening South-South Cooperation for Global Prosperity. The organizers of this roundtable are United Nations in India, Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, and Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. To introduce the panel, the roundtable speakers, chairs, moderators, may I invite Ms. Radhika Kaul Batra. She is Chief of Staff, UN Resident Coordinator's Office, and kindly take it over from here. Thank you, Ms. Batra.
Thank you so much, and we are waiting for everyone else to come from outside and quickly fill the seats. I know panelists have traveled from across the length and breadth of many countries to come here, so we are looking forward for an exciting discussion today. It is my absolute pleasure to invite the panelists. May I please invite Ambassador Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary, Government of India, sir. May I please invite Ms. Abhilasha Joshi, Additional Secretary, Development Partnership Administration, DPA Division, MEA. May I please invite Sachin Chaturvedi, Professor, Director General of RIS. May I invite Mr. Shombi Sharp, UN Resident Coordinator. And I'm delighted to also invite the panelists, Anu Peltula, Director AI Statistics Service, UNCTAD, who's come from Geneva. Anu, oh, she's already here, welcome. Christian Cueva, Deputy Director of Planning and Information System, Amexit. Dr. Rajesh Tandon, President, PRIA. Ibrahim Awad, Professor of Practice and Director of Center for Migration and Refugee Studies, Department of Public Policy and Administration, the American University, Cairo, Egypt. Welcome, sir. Satish Mishra, Economist, Policy Advisor and Corporate Strategist, Indonesia, former Head and Chief Economist, UN Support Facility for Indonesia Recovery, UNDP, Jakarta. Welcome. Azita Berar, Chair, Board of United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, Geneva, and former Director of ILO. Welcome. Imran Valodia, Pro Vice Chancellor and Director, Southern Center for Inequality Studies, University of South Africa. Welcome. I think we have quite a full panel and an exciting afternoon ahead. So without wasting any further time, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi to take the process forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Radhika, for getting the ball rolling. I think, as you can see, we have a very rich panel, and we have very limited time this evening. The theme is extremely important, and I'm glad that this session, thanks to UN India here for facilitating organization of this panel and enthusiasm with which Alakji has pushed this panel. I think it's extremely rich now. We have very limited time. The broad context in terms of how Global South is emerging, what role we are playing at the global level, how the role of the G7 countries in the global economy is declining. Those of you who have read recent writings by Professor Deepak Nair are aware in terms of how this rise is both based on the macro fundamentals that are in favor of the Global South, but also how they are going to bring in dimensions that are important for the transition that the Global South is going to accomplish. I think with this panel, I don't have to make any initial remarks which I had thought of, but in interest of time, I would keep that aside for the time being. Let me first invite as I said, this session is facilitated by UN, so we have Shombi Sharp, who has been playing an extremely important role as head of the UN family in India. So I would request Shombi for his remarks.
Here.
I think this is better.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Chaturvedi, our good friend. It's a great honor to join Ambassador Saran, Ms. Joshi, and all of the other panelists here, and to greet all of you in the room and colleagues from the United Nations as well. Let me wish you all Aapko Naye Saal ki aur Vishwa Hindi Divas ki Shubhkamnaएं. So I don't know if everybody is aware, of course we all know there was a New Year's, but it's also today is the World Hindi Day. So congratulations to everybody. And I think that, let me thank the organizers for this session, but also more broadly speaking, this is an incredibly impressive conclave over these few days. And so RIS and IHD and Niti Aayog and UN agencies are partnering as well. I think that, we all closed our eyes on 2023 just a few days ago, and we were probably hoping, to open our eyes to a world not beset by crises, not beset by war and debt and poverty and climate chaos. Unfortunately, that's magical thinking. It didn't happen. We opened our eyes onto a 2024, which is basically nothing has changed, or if anything, we got more bad news. We've heard that 2023 smashed all previous records in terms of the hottest year, possibly in the last 100,000 years, I think I've heard as well. Almost breached 1.5 degrees, actually, and now many are prognosticating that we will break 1.5 degrees in 2024 in this year. But there are many reasons to be optimistic, and this also carries through from 2023. And I think, the one is that we know what to do. We have the SDGs, and the world came together and recommitted to the SDGs at the SDG Summit as the globally agreed blueprint pathway towards the world that we need and that we want. And secondly, is that the global South has emerged, and India has consolidated or strengthened its position as a leading voice for the global South in terms of putting truly the SDGs at the core of the international discourse. And the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the leadership of the G20 presidency, was truly impressive in, despite all of the headwinds, in gaining a consensus, a global consensus with the SDGs right there, G20 consensus with the SDGs right there at the center, and bringing in inclusion, the African Union, for example, into the G20. And just another example of India's leadership in terms of how the world is changing and how this aligns with the UN's vision as well. And we look forward to the Summit of the Future next year also. Now, South-South cooperation and India's leadership in South-South cooperation is an important part of this story. And I'm very, very pleased and proud that the UN system here in India, the country team in India, in our brand new UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, our 5-year partnership with India, has put complementing India's South-South cooperation leadership as a strategic direction for the very, very first time. And we are just launching now a joint fund to help our UN agencies partner with India in that purpose. So we're looking forward to some very exciting new partnerships in terms of South-South cooperation. Our UN agencies have a good understanding of Indian best practice, development best practice across the country. We're present we're to some degree present in every single state in India. But the idea is that we can help identify, codify, and take Indian best practice to the international stage and to other countries. So it's truly a two-way partnership, so to speak. And more broadly, it's important that the international community and the UN has recognized the importance of South-South cooperation. We've had a breakthrough recognition, and the colleagues from the UN will speak more about this, by the UN Statistics Commission last year. And that is a framework for measuring South-South cooperation as part of SDG 17.3. This is critically important. I want to note that India has been a key leader in this decision, having co-chaired the relevant subgroups at the IAEG and the SDG monitoring that came up with this framework. And so I think this is another important part of India's leadership in terms of helping us move South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation forward. Pleased to have UNCTAD colleague here, colleague from Mexico, who is one of the first South-South cooperation providers using this new framework to help measure contributions. So let me just stop there, but to say that we very much look forward to India's leadership in leveraging this framework to help measure and monitor and complement the leadership on South-South cooperation. And we in the UN system are here to be a committed partner along the journey, hand in hand. So, aaj ki charcha achi rahe. Bahut dhanyavad.
Thank you. Thanks, Shombi, for your very rich remarks and setting the context for our discussion on South-South. My friends and colleagues, as you may be aware, the Ministry of External Affairs, led by the Development Partnership Administration, DPA, is the organization within MEA that leads India's development cooperation on ground. We are extremely privileged to have Madam Abhilasha Joshi with us. She's Additional Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs and leads a very important component of India's development partnership with the Global South, which is for capacity building. We requested her to make these special remarks. So, Madam, over to you.
Namaste and good evening. Respected Ambassador Shamsaran sir, Mr. Shombi Shah, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, all the distinguished panelists and dear friends, colleagues. First of all, congratulations to all the organizers for putting together this conclave on advancing human development in the Global South. I'm very happy to be here in this round table on South-South cooperation for global prosperity. Friends, we are all fresh from India's just handing over the presidency of the G20, where it has been made amply clear that the Global South has continued to be at the front and center stage of our global deliberations. Our ancient philosophy, which has always extended to partner countries, gave us a unique opportunity during this presidency to bring the concerns of the Global South. And one of the main contributions, of course, was the inclusion of a large partner, the AU, as a G20 member. Unfortunately, the world remains deeply divided. We are facing extreme challenges in terms of health, regional security, food and energy security, climate change, finance, several others. The priorities of the Global South are often not adequately voiced and therefore not adequately addressed. But the existing platforms also have proved to be inadequate in addressing these challenges. It is increasingly clear that the voice of 3/4 of the global humanity, accounting for almost 40% of global GDP, cannot remain marginal in international discourse. And that is why it is important that the Global South countries come together to share our experiences, learn from our traditional and local knowledge, and share our best practices, especially when we do not have the luxury to replicate the development path of the northern countries. And the principles of South-South cooperation remain as relevant today as they have been when they were proposed. India is committed to South-South cooperation, which was clear by Honorable Prime Minister hosting the two Voice of Global South summits and the G20 agreeing to work together towards promoting strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. Honorable Prime Minister offered to share India's experiences through simple, scalable, and sustainable solutions. The priorities laid out by the G20 have given a roadmap towards global prosperity that needs to be achieved by all the institutions and all the countries of the Global South. Friends, we have a very comprehensive portfolio in terms of development partnership. For India, it is truly a partnership of equals. We have development projects in more than 80 countries. We have a very comprehensive capacity building relationship with more than 150 countries of the Global South. Both our Prime Minister and our External Affairs Minister have articulated the need for strengthening South-South cooperation by adopting the principles of self-reliance, sharing of our knowledge and best practices, and scaling up. In terms of capacity building, I hope and I'm sure most of you would be familiar with our ITEC program, which was instituted way back in the 1960s, even when India was a newly independent nation. But sharing our knowledge has been something that we have been doing since time immemorial. And now the ITEC program is not just limited to only technical cooperation, but also has advanced to several aspects of governance, whether it is for policy-level trainings, for institutions outside the executive, including judiciary and legislature. We are providing trainings to field-level administrators and enablers of social justice and prosperity, like legal professionals, human rights practitioners, and policy-related professionals. We have a very vast portfolio for security-related trainings, whether it is pure security or cybercrime, money laundering, etc. And of course, gender-oriented trainings. We have, over the years, more than 225,000 professionals and government officials of partner countries who have availed of these training programs. And through our centers of excellence in IT, more than 190,000 professionals would have obtained training to be market ready in our partner countries. We also have a very vast portfolio of scholarships, whether it is through the ICCR, through online platforms, through bilateral programs, as well as setting up entrepreneurship and skill development centers. Friends, our projects have boosted connectivity and infrastructure in all our partner countries. Other than this, we have also extended financial and humanitarian assistance in times of need. And as far as our health, digital, our portfolio is concerned, we are committed to share this through our development partnership. We are committed to share our DPI infrastructure, such as UPI, Unique ID, DigiLocker, etc., to countries which are interested in learning from these experiences. Another unique contribution has been in the field of heritage conservation, where we are partnering in the Global South for conserving cultural heritage, not only building skills and capacities for the future, but also preserving, conserving, and documenting our collective past heritage. One of the important aspects was also in this G20, the acknowledgement of the invaluable contribution of local communities and living heritage to sustain livelihoods and inclusive development, and recognition of the intrinsic and enabling value of culture as a transformative driver of SDGs. So friends, it is apparently and abundantly clear that as a follower, as a practitioner of South-South cooperation and its abiding principles, India is committed to work with all our partner countries for mutual progress and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Joshi. I think, as she very rightly mentioned, India's G20 presidency has given huge impetus in terms of how participation of Global South moves forward. And in that way, she mentioned about African Union joining the high table at G20, making it G21. Also, I think it is important here to mention that before and after the G20 main summit, India hosted what was called as Voice of Global South Summit, where heads of states participated. And at that point, Indian Prime Minister launched what was called as Global South Center of Excellence to share the examples that Ms. Joshi was giving in terms of the digital public infrastructure, digital public goods. So what Indian accomplishments are and what others are already achieving, how do we bring in new narrative on development, exchange of ideas. So a new center has been established. I'm extremely privileged to mention that this would be housed at RIS, which is sort of India's commitment for Global South, and I'm extremely privileged to have Ambassador Shamsaran here on this panel. He led as chairman of RIS, but also as Foreign Secretary, shaped several new initiatives on Global South, and also as ambassador in Nepal and in other places in Indonesia, has contributed in terms of how Global South and the partnerships look like. As President of India International Center, where we all are here today, he has been encouraging interactions among the Global South on various fronts. So, sir, we have great pleasure to have you with us to give the keynote address. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sachin. Let me recognize my friend Shombi Sharp and my colleague from MEA, Abhilash Joshi, and other distinguished panelists on the dais this afternoon. Congratulations to the Institute for Human Development for their celebrating their anniversary, as also, of course, RIS celebrating its 40th anniversary. I'm very glad that these celebratory occasions are being combined with what is a very impressive gathering of intellectuals, of policymakers, to really look at the aspect of global development at a time when, in fact, the global economy is not in very good shape. And therefore, we really need some new ideas, some innovative thinking, in order to try and see whether the global economy can be brought back to a fresh spurt of growth and development. Let me begin by noticing that the topic is talking about South-South cooperation for global prosperity. I think most of the time we have been talking about South-South cooperation for the prosperity of the southern countries. We have not really thought in terms of this new dimension of how South-South cooperation can actually also promote global prosperity. And I think that's an important, I don't know whether the organizers did have that in mind, but I certainly found that quite striking, that yes, we are recognizing that the economic profile of developing countries, in particular the large emerging economies, this profile has very dramatically increased in the recent years. So just looking at, for example, exports, at a time when, in fact, global trade in goods at least is stagnant, perhaps even declining. Today, the countries of the South are responsible for something like 47% of global exports. So if we are looking at where the drivers of growth will come from, as we now enter into the new year, I think we have to very seriously look at these drivers which are located in the South. I think that's an important takeaway. The other aspect is that today, if we look at the prospects for the next several years, you see that global growth is probably not going to be more than 3% or so over the next few years. Trade, as I mentioned, is likely to be stagnant. If you look at the kind of projections for growth, you will see that some of the major advanced economies are looking at maybe 1%, 1.4% growth. The developing countries, even if they are not growing as fast as they were before, they are still about 4% or more. So you see the kind of gap that there is. So really, if in the next few years we are really looking at where the growth impulses will come from, they will have to come from the South. And I think that recognition itself should inform the kind of cooperation that we are thinking of amongst the southern countries. Now, one is the aspect of growth, but I think also what we have to recognize is that we are, at this point of time, at a particularly propitious moment for developing countries, because number one, we have had this very successful G20 meeting recently in India. I think it would be fair to say that it was one of the most successful G20 meetings in recent memory. And a number of innovative ideas emerged from that G20 meeting. What is important to me is that India's chairmanship of the G20 is going to be followed by Indonesia's chairmanship of the G20, and thereafter South Africa being the chairman of the G20. So on three successive summits, really in a sense the direction will be in fact given by some of the most important emerging economies. And that is therefore, as I said, a propitious moment, because I think this is the time when countries of the global south can take advantage of this to really advance and work on an agenda which is more important for developing countries. Lastly, I would like to point out that as has been pointed out by my colleague from the Ministry of External Affairs, in the Global South, there are a number of very, very interesting innovations with regard to growth. And not only has, of course, India in a long period been experimenting with a number of very, very interesting ideas, but has actually done a great deal of work, practical work. I would just like to mention that, for example, when I was in ambassador in Nepal, we started what was known as the small development projects. These were only for about 3 crores of rupees each project. They had to be quick yielding, 6 months to 1 year. They had to involve the local community. Importantly, also the host government. We did not think in terms of an NGO, that we had nothing to do with the local government. We involved as a stakeholder the local government as well. And you would be amazed how successful these kind of community development projects were. Simple things like, if we managed to build a couple of toilets in the schools for girls, immediately the recruitment of girls to these schools went up. Similarly, if we just put a wall around the school, that also, because of better security, also led to a growth of girls being educated in these communities. Or just by building a small road which gave connectivity to the villages or communities during the monsoon season, when they used to be cut off, that made a huge difference to the local economy. With those learnings, we have been able to take that concept to other countries also with similar kind of results. I'm just mentioning this as an example of what kind of innovative work is possible in the context of this South-South cooperation. So let me stop here. I know that there are many speakers on the panel. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for inviting me to this.
Thank you. Thanks, sir, for your contribution and bringing out the fact that development cooperation can often bring in people, and it can avoid being exclusively G2G. It brings in people, it brings in communities, and then contribute and strengthen. So friends, we finish with the component that was more of the inaugural and context setting. Now we have panelists here who would take the conversation forward and would help us manage time because we all have extremely limited sort of schedule here. But important point, I think, for this session would be to highlight how the role of the Global South would look like as we see, as Ambassador Shamsaran emphasized, on the global prosperity. And this is where the value system that the Global South would bring on table. Ambassador Saran also alluded to statistics by mentioning the 47% share in exports. And if you see IMF paper that was released in November, very clearly brings out 80% of the growth would come from the global south. If you see concomitant numbers that are there for G7, you find a consistent decline in the global GDP, in global employment, in global value added, and you also see a rise of value added, high quality and high technology and products from the global south. So you find a huge share that is only going up. Important part would be what is that we bring on table when it comes to shaping the global narrative on development, on growth, and also on global participation. Madam Joshi mentioned about the DPG and DPGI, so the digital public goods and digital public infrastructure. So the role that the global north has played so far in terms of creating global public goods, south has been contributing, but would that take the shape we are going to occupy in terms of the quantitative share in the global economy? And that, I think, would be important, taking point that Ambassador Saran mentioned in terms of people's participation. So would the narrative change? How the South-South cooperation would bring in prosperity for all, would avoid the kind of contestations that we are seeing. Indonesian presidency, Indian presidency, then we are going to Brazil, and after Brazil to South Africa. This clearly shows the way things are being lined up, as some of us are already in touch with Brazil, and the issue paper that Brazil has issued is very clear in terms of how Brazil is going to take forward and enrich further the G20 agenda India has placed through a lifestyle for sustainable development, or DPG, DPGI, women-led development, etc. I do not want to repeat all that, but important would be, as I said, what values we bring on table, and that probably would be extremely important. The debate and discussion on measurement of Global South's contribution is nothing new, and Anu, as you would agree, South has not been very comfortable with the idea, and from that perspective, the South-South cooperation is also not a homogeneous entity. It's highly heterogeneous. Several papers have been written drawing distinctions between the way Latin American countries conduct South-South cooperation and the way Asian countries do that. Within Asia, China and India are two big partners of the Global South. Both of them have very different approaches. So there is no homogeneity here. And in that process, the idea of measurement is something which has drawn in a lot of debate, not now, but right from Busan 2011 onwards, and with the GPEDC and others that came up, the debate has only got intensified. So we would have presentations from UNCTAD, which has led this process for some time on how measurement of the South-South cooperation should be done. So we are glad that director from the statistics division of the UNCTAD is here with us. So Anu Paltola, the floor is yours. I think we can just agree to have 5 to 7 minute intervention, and then if time permits, we would have second round for Q&A. So may I request you to take the floor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists, experts and colleagues. It's my pleasure to join you here today for this important roundtable on strengthening South-South cooperation for global prosperity. Actually, prosperity for all is at the core of the vision of UNCTAD, UN Conference on Trade and Development. And it's also 50 degrees warmer here than it was in Finland, where I was for my Christmas break. So this is a very enjoyable temperature for me. Thank you for arranging that as well. But the topic is timelier than ever, perhaps. At a time of challenges and cascading crises, as was mentioned, we need stronger solidarity to address the many setbacks we have seen that countries have experienced in the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you for the insightful words shared on India's role and on the global context we are living through. As a statistician, I'm happy to see the many statistics also being referred to that we work on in terms of global trade and development. South-South cooperation is crucial for progress in sustainable development, alongside other development support. Last year, the United Nations SDG Summit brought world leaders together to consider how to rescue progress in sustainable development and called for stronger support to countries hit by economic and debt challenges. This year, the UN Summit of the Future will need to show new determined action. Events like today and the conference to follow are crucial for shaping the joint agenda in such a way that it reflects the voice of the Global South. Now, for the first time ever, there is a common agreement on how to measure South-South cooperation. This hasn't been an easy journey. In many ways, it is a historic agreement in an area that has been long debated. Now we have a conceptual framework to measure South-South cooperation, and it was developed by the South for the South. UNCTAD was asked to provide the Secretariat to this effort. The framework was welcomed in March 2022 by all UN member states at the UN Statistical Commission, when they endorsed a new SDG indicator on development support, namely Indicator 1731. This voluntary framework will help countries to report their data to the SDG indicator globally. This is an area where the data of northern provider countries has for a long time shaped the narrative. The new framework enables bringing the data of the South to the debate, as it incorporates all the different modalities of South-South cooperation, both in kind and financial support among countries. And we hope that this framework can be applied by all countries, and that is also our intention when we start testing the framework more globally. UNCTAD and the OECD are the co-custodians of the SDG indicator. The OECD has a special role to report the data on north-south flows, and UNCTAD was requested by countries to report data on south-south flows. This indicator measures the flows, the support flows between countries. It does not assess the impact or efficiency of those flows. The venue of our event today is also well suited for the discussion. India chaired the special group, as was mentioned, which developed the framework to measure South-South cooperation. India also took the lead in ensuring that the UN, namely UNCTAD, be the representative of southern countries in the reporting of their data to the SDG indicator. We are joined today by our Mexican colleague. Mexico, together with Brazil, elaborated the very first version of the framework, which was tested and refined by interested southern countries, including India. India's leadership has been incremental to the process to get us where we are today. In a joint statement to the United Nations Statistical Commission in 2022, the G77 and China emphasized that the new SDG indicator will play a central role in supporting inclusive development, recovery from the pandemic, and progress towards the 2030 agenda, not only on the SDG 17, but across the entire agenda. It can also help manage development support flows more effectively and target them more strategically to address the gaps. Since its creation, UNCTAD has been working in a close collaboration with southern countries, amplifying your voice and facilitating collaboration. And I believe that's the reason why UNCTAD was asked to step into this role. Next year, UNCTAD and the G77 will both celebrate the 60th anniversary. We are highly committed to supporting interested countries in developing their capacity to collect and report data on South-South cooperation. In our global survey, 80 developing countries expressed their interest to start reporting data within 1 or 2 years, but also expressed the need to receive capacity development support, an area where we hope to work together with India as one of the pioneering countries. We are at the very start of this journey, which has the potential to change the narrative of development finance debates by bringing the voice of the southern countries to the center. The world needs more inclusive information on development support. In the SDG indicator, this can happen. To address this global task, UNCTAD is engaging with the UN widely, with the UN regional commissions, with the UN Office on South-South Cooperation and resident coordinator offices, as we do in India, to support our member states. I hope this offers a real opportunity to respond to the call of action by the UN high-level conferences on South-South cooperation, which were held in Nairobi and Buenos Aires, where they asked to develop country-led systems to assess South-South cooperation, improve national data collection, and to reinvigorate UN support to this work. This framework is intended to speak with your voice, and your engagement will define how strong it will become. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anu, for helping us manage time and also bring in very substantive points. I think you're right. BAPA plus 40 and has emphasized on country-led processes. Today morning we had some discussions on what way we take the indicators and parameters that are important for human development. I think for development cooperation, a lot of discussions are on, and I'm glad that you have captured in. One important agency that is helping us document through their own national system is MXID. And MXID has also contributed in the Ibero-American Bank's own system of statistics collection. So I'm glad, Kristen, you are here, and you would help us understand how you are focusing on South-South cooperation, but also if you have any points to reflect on Anu's presentation. Over to you.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants and distinguished panelists, first of all, I would like to offer a quick apology in advance for the shaky voice and the shaky hands. There's a 12-hour difference for me, and caffeine is starting to kick in. But I will also like to extend a sincere apology to, of course, the RIS, to UN India, and to the Institute for Human Development for hosting this roundtable. And of course, a special thanks to my fellow panelists and to Anu, whose support has allowed me to join you here today. So I would like to start off my intervention by just talking to you a little bit about Mexico's perspective on South-South cooperation and data collection. For us, of course, South-South cooperation is a fundamental catalyst for global development and the 2030 Agenda achievement. But we also see South-South cooperation as a way to foster very much needed inclusive and horizontal partnerships, and also to leverage the vast knowledges that are available on the Global South. And just to illustrate a little bit our commitment to this global prosperity, the Mexican Agency for International Development Cooperation assumed an implementing role in projects aimed at enhancing the quality of life of migration-prone communities in Central America and the Caribbean for the first time since its creation back in 2011. And these projects that started in El Salvador and Honduras have now extended to Cuba, to Guatemala, and to Belize. And in this way is that Mexico is seeking to favor, for example, the integration of young professionals into the formal labor market, and also to contribute to food security for families in the region. And all with the ultimate goal, of course, of promoting regional and global prosperity, human sustainable development, and making, of course, migration a choice and not a necessity. As of December 2023, Mexico was actively involved in over 350 international development cooperation projects, of which 145 of those were dedicated solely to South-South cooperation efforts. In 2022 alone, Mexico's federal public administration targeted 16 out of the 17 SDGs through their own South-South cooperation initiatives, and overall Mexico's international development cooperation for that year was over $132 million. So the numbers that I'm just telling you have a reason to exist in this particular participation. It is because they help me illustrate the role of data collection in shaping effective South-South cooperation efforts. Because it is through data collection and analysis, that we can make informed decisions, that we can prevent duplication of efforts, that we can identify opportunities and ensure, of course, and the ultimate goal is that cooperation reaches the places where it is the most needed. In the Latin American region, Mexico has played, of course, a pioneering role in innovating data collection tools, including our National Registry on International Development Cooperation. We've developed methodologies that we've shared with other countries on how to assess the opportunity cost of Mexican experts that participate in technical cooperation efforts, and also tools for comprehensive project evaluation. And such methodologies that I already mentioned have been shared through bilateral, regional, and even international knowledge sharing experiences. One example that I can give to you is that back in November, we received a visit from colleagues from Uruguay and Colombia to know about our information systems and to use and how we use the information with such systems. Also, in order to favor the reporting of the SDG 17.3.1, we were part, of course, of the task force that constructed the methodology, and we are currently collaborating with the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean to identify opportunity areas in countries' information systems, data collection processes, and facilitate the reporting from countries in the region. Moreover, Mexico actively participates in international efforts, not only in the 17.3.1 indicator conceptual framework, but also in SAHIP's regional exercise and the TSSD metric. And that is because we firmly believe that transparency, continuous knowledge sharing, and data availability are essential for informed decision-making and for the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And of course, after stating this whole context and necessity, is that we must convey collaborative initiatives to strengthen the share of best practices, to refine evaluation methodologies, to construct a common language on South-South cooperation, to bolster the capacity of nations in the global South. Mexico, of course, stands ready to contribute actively to these efforts, and we also believe that the participation of India as a pioneer on its own has the capacity to potentialize such efforts as well, as it did when it revised the conceptual framework for the measurement of South-South cooperation. So just very briefly, I think what I can say is that the robust foundation of Mexico's South-South cooperation approach relies a lot on data collection, knowledge sharing, and strategic decision-making. And in that way, Mexico is committed to collaborate and to strengthen such cooperation through inclusive partnerships and dedicated efforts, with the ultimate goal, of course, promoting global prosperity and the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda. That would be all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Christian. I think that would be extremely important and good that you emphasized in terms of what Mexico's approach is in terms of data sharing. And I think as long as countries are not ranked in terms of quantum of assistance they are providing, I think what Anu mentioned in terms of bringing resources together for collective prosperity is something which is extremely important. At RIS, we initiated a major exercise to collate numbers in terms of India's assistance to other countries. And fortunately, we have completed the exercise till 21-22, and we have collected statistics right from 1947, when India became independent. And incidentally, we found that India assisted other fellow developing countries right in 1946, when India had interim government. Not even full-fledged independence was there. So this, as part of our collective commitment, is there. I think it is important to see when it comes to leveraging these statistics for impact assessment. In OECD, Anu, they call it monitoring and evaluation, and in South, we call it as impact assessment.
So those nuances are there, but I think it is important to see how best this can be tracked out and can be taken in. One important part that when Ambassador Shamsaran was chairman of RIS, we initiated was to bring in civil society into this narrative. And the DPA, MEA, and RIS and civil society, we launched one platform that was called as FIDC, Forum for Indian Development Cooperation, because very often this question comes up, India is a poor country, why India is giving to others? Why should India give? And that's question that this forum, FIDC, has been grappling with. And I'm so glad today we have Dr. Rajesh Tandon with us, who is a leading luminary in the world of civil society. He's also UNESCO chair, but more importantly is chairperson of Forum for Indian Development Cooperation, FIDC. So Rajesh Bhai, over to you. You take this one.
I think maybe. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sachin and the organizers. And without, in order to maintain time, let me just say a few comments. Priya, the organization I have been working with, and like many others like Priya, have a life longer than RIS. So first of all, congratulations, RIS, younger brother. The reason I say that is not to lose sight of the fact that South-South cooperation in the 70s and 80s and 90s was an integral part of the work that Indian civil society did. And it was built on principles of mutual learning, sharing knowledge and expertise. And in each of these cases, we received encouragement and support from both sets of governments. Not necessarily formally, but always through our ambassadors, through our missions, and through colleagues in various ministries. When I remember in the last 2 decades, 3 examples of Priya's own role in enabling learning by other developing countries. And in all of these cases, United Nations system had played a role. And because this conference is today focusing on that, and Mr. Sharp has made an observation about the new framework, I hope the UN system continues to play that important role of connecting. Chinese delegation came to learn about how Indian civil society works with Indian government, curiously. Indonesian government delegation came to understand how independent commissions like Information Commission, Women's Commission function both with line ministries and with civil society. For them, it was curiosity. And we had a large delegation from Afghanistan very recently, which came to learn about our local government system, Panchayati Raj. These are just illustrations of where the role of civil society in the Indian context has been instrumental in enabling, facilitating, and even pushing the mandate of South-South cooperation. And going forward, I think it is important to keep that in view. Localizing sustainable development goals. UN system can set up global goals. Change happens only locally. In order to have change locally, all local actors must be involved, not just the community, but also local governments. They are constitutionally mandated bodies and have a responsibility. But this approach to multi-actor collaboration, as exemplified through even the FIDC forum, is an integral part of South-South cooperation. And that requires effort in order to make those relationships and complementarities work. We have demonstrated that communities' engagement also means use of communities' knowledge. We have reference to the G20 declaration, which has emphasized indigenous knowledge systems. And the use of indigenous knowledge is not just use of knowledge which was earlier, but even today, contemporarily. I remember a conversation with the international delegation comprising of Southeast Asian countries, where they were interested in learning about how India's development program for tribal development happens. And we have been very successful in contextualizing tribal development. We have tribes all over the country, from the Himalayas to Kerala, and east to west. There is a framework, but there is a contextual relevance to that framework. And I think it is important that the issue of sustainability in development cooperation is kept in the center. And India's experience of development in India has enormous lessons for localizing, contextual, local knowledge, not pushing one size fits all. And if I may add, that should also be the principle of monitoring and evaluating the impact of South-South cooperation. Because if we believe in self-reliance and empowered partnership, then those principles need to be upfront in monitoring the impact. It's not the numbers, but does it move self-reliance and empowerment of our partners to the next stage? And that perspective is particularly relevant when we move towards strengthening the opportunities that have been created for South-South cooperation. Finally, I want to mention that during G20, our Prime Minister brought in a very important perspective, the life perspective. And why it is important? I recently went to meet some family members in Singapore. And I noticed that on billboards and in classrooms, there is a lot of discussion on sustainability. But the pattern of consumption hasn't changed. Plastic bags are carrying tea, coffee, and juices. Consumption in its current form is not going to help with sustainability. And we have the largest laboratory of this country in reuse, repair, and again reuse. That is a value system. And I think in our sustainable development conversation in South-South cooperation, I have found similar value systems in South Africa, in Mexico, and in Indonesia. And I think that needs to be included when we move forward, and bringing in the complementarity of expertise and skill set that civil society has in each of our countries is very important. The Ambassador Saran made a very important point that South-South cooperation is not just for the global South. There are many examples where innovations made in India have been followed up in UK, in US, in Canada, and in Netherlands. I have been involved in those, so I can tell you those examples. That means that South-South cooperation is creating an opportunity for the well-being of the global order, not just for southern countries. So thank you very much, and I look forward to taking this conversation forward in FIDC and RIS platforms. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Rajbhai, for emphasizing this point again on prosperity shared and co-created, co-production of knowledge. And I think your intervention fits in very well with what we are going to hear from Professor Ibrahim Awad. I think his work on migration, particularly the Global South perspective on this, the politics of transition and the way migration has assumed centrality in several discussions, and your work on labor-related issues, I think are extremely important for the Global South. And coming from Egypt, you have this unique stand in terms of how the global scenario looks like when we talk about Global South cooperation. And Professor Awad, as you would agree, the observation that Dr. Rajesh Tandon has made in terms of enabling the Global South to be self-reliant, to have endogenous growth stimulus that they need, I think would be extremely important. I have great pleasure in inviting you to take the floor now. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you very much for my colleagues on the panel. And I see the opportunity to also congratulate IHD for its 25th anniversary and for organizing such an important and interesting pre-conclave, and I'm sure also the conclave itself. In fact, Mr. Chair, I will place migration within a larger framework, which is regional and sub-regional integration as a form of cooperation between developing countries of the Global South. Regional cooperation has been understood as cooperation at the continental level. For effective cooperation between countries of the Global South, the sub-regional level may be more appropriate. And developing countries in the Global South, if you take Africa, if you take Latin America, if you take Asia, have been engaged in schemes of integration at the sub-regional level. The rationale is that decolonization has traced borders that artificially divided communities, divided economic circuits, markets for goods and services, labor markets, and therefore reduced the efficiency of both markets of goods and services and of labor markets. If you integrate if you get into a progressive process of integration of these countries, which to some extent or to different extents carry characteristics of incomplete nation states, you are helping them together to cooperate, to grow, to redistribute, and to also contribute to global prosperity. The problem with sub-regional integration schemes, you had two sorts of problems. One political, problems between countries engaged in sub-regional integration schemes, and economic and labor market as well. Similarity of economic structures, of production, disparity in levels of development. And this has kept some schemes for many years, for instance, SADC, from engaging, from putting together a scheme for labor migration, for free mobility of labor. I do not want to take very long, but the approach, in fact, one of the problems of integration in developing countries is that it has followed a trade approach similar to that of industrialized countries of the global north. And the experience of European integration has to a great extent characterized integration schemes, and which have adopted also a trade approach. I think that a production approach would help developing countries of the Global South in their path to increased cooperation. I wonder if we cannot think of industrial policy at the sub-regional level. Industrial policy that would help countries increase their production and redistribute this production, industrial level, in more than one policy area, so that they can, following the European experience, but not in trade, following the European, exchange benefits and equalize benefits. What you gain in one policy area, he or she gains in another policy area, but always through production, and not production for import substitution, but rather in production to engage in the international trading system, which would require also a revision of the international trade regime. And I think that in this way, you can contribute to growth, development, prosperity at the sub-region level, but you will also contribute to growth and prosperity at the global level. I will stop here. Thank you very much. And let me just add that I hope that the framework that you mentioned could help measure the progress in cooperation between developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Awad. I think you very rightly emphasized in terms of focusing on production-based strategies for regional integration rather than solely getting out with the trade-based approach. And I think this may be, extremely important. And as we know, UNCTAD's own report shows 72% of the global trade is in parts and components now. So this shows how value chains are becoming important. There are 2 sessions we are doing in this conference itself from RIS, which are focusing on this very important aspect. So thank you. Thanks for making this up. Let me now bring in Chairperson of the UN Research Institute of Social Development, Madam Azita Berar, for her remarks. You want to go there, please?
No, I thought after Imran.
I don't know.
I think this is working now?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Chair, and greetings to the distinguished head table, government officials, the 3 organizers, and the panelists, by co-panelists on this one. In the interest of time, I would want just to focus on an area where I think a lot more can be done and needs to be done in terms of South-South collaboration in this perspective of the ideational impact of the Global South. And that is in terms of policy innovation in the area of informal economy. I will go straight into, in a telegraphic mode, into some headlines. First of all, I hope that there are many people in this gathering and beyond that will still be shocked or amazed to learn that 62% of the global workforce in 2024 are working and producing in conditions of informality and the informal economy. And we can just deduct from that the levels of interactions with all what we have been talking about on human development. And this type of phenomenon, which is no longer marginal, 62% of the global workforce, and we heard in the previous session that actually the indicators for the measurement are progressing, have been progressing over the last years very much, and actually it's going to enlarge. So probably we are even undercounting and underestimating. I do not need to recall in this community all the conceptual developments that have been taking place, and India has been Indian scholars have been in India and abroad major contributors to the conceptual discussion, theoretical discussions around the informal economy, but also very much from the civil society. You mentioned that in terms of action at the local level, what helps, what in terms of also bringing recognition of the contribution of informal economy workers and producers, because there are lots of entrepreneurs in the informal economy, to the global economy and to the national economy. Having said that, we have to acknowledge the journey, and we have to see that the phenomenon is not going away, and actually it is being reinventing itself in new guises, including through the latest technologies on digital labor platforms. So all the way through this conceptual evolution up to measurement advancement advancement in the measurement excuse me, through the adoption in 2015 of the first international labor standard on informal economy, transition from, okay, transition from, is it working? You hear me? Yeah. From the informal to the formal, the concept of transition, and transitions in plural, it is recognizing, if I may characterize this standard, reconciling, finally, eventually, the world of formal work with informal work, connecting them, and also reconciling the global North vision on informality with the global South vision of informality. And of course, for our panel discussion, what is very important, apart from the conceptual theoretical measurement issues, are the policy innovations. There has been a very rich background of policy experimentation in the global South, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in many countries, on how to tackle, how to deal with the question of informality. And there are major headways that have been achieved in advancing human development and in agreeing on the effective ways and multiple ways, pathways of transition to formality. Several countries actually in the global South have been at the forefront of this debate. I mentioned India, but I could mention Peru, Brazil, Argentina, Indonesia. In Africa, Kenya and Ghana, how can you use the latest technologies, what they call tech for social good, tech for transition to formality? So there is a real potential, and I would say an untapped potential, for increased South-South cooperation, for policy discussion as part of this debate on new economic development and employment paradigms, including how to address the issue of informality. We know all that informality, although it has penetrated now global North economies, and rates are higher than what they used to be 50 years ago when this term was cornered, nevertheless, it remains much higher rates of informality. It's really a global South phenomenon in that sense. And while we have a better understanding of strategies that work, through policy experimentation, many experiences that failed, but they were rich in terms of lessons. We all know we can't have a blanket approach, diversity of situations in terms of sectors, but also local governance networks that you put on the table and who should be in the discussion to have effective pathways. And we also know that curbing the levels of informality is not granted. Some countries who made major headways had seen their progress stalled or actually regressing from that phenomenon in another area. So it is a multifactorial approach. It is a package of policy options that are there that can work. And there are the dynamics of formal employment and informal employment that are very important to acknowledge, to understand in very many local contexts. We all know that there is more informalization of formal jobs, that may be more formalization of informal jobs. So we have to acknowledge that. We all know that countries with the similar growth patterns or similar rates of growth are having different rates of informality and less or more policies and institutions to address this phenomenon. So I really think that if you put it in the perspective of global prosperity, as you have put it, as a title for this session, or whether we think of the future of work, or we are thinking of how to tackle inequalities and inequalities in opportunities especially, the ideational impact and the ideational contribution of the Global South in terms of policy innovation to address the informal economy is a major area, and I really do hope that this ideational impact that should include our academic community and their interface with policy think tanks and policymakers should be advancing the South-South cooperation, and I hope this is an aspect. I think we are asking too much of our colleagues from UNCTAD with this new indicator, that the ideational impact can also be measured in that SDG, new stage indicator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Barar. Thanks for your ideas and suggestions. I think we would straight away now go to Professor Imran Valodia. I think you need no introduction. Yes, you please. Yeah. So over to you.
So as the one academic who's neither a UN official, neither a kind of official of the kind of Indian state, and I've got the license that an academic has, which is to be a little bit controversial, and I'm sort of going to use that. But before I do that, I just want to say that it's a great honor kind of for me to be here, and a huge congratulations to IHD on their 25th anniversary. My kind of research institute, the Southern Center for Inequalities Studies, and my university, the University of the Witwatersrand, has engaged with IHD for kind of about half of the time that IHD's existed, and it's been a fantastic pleasure. And for us, it's a key part of our South-South relationship. So thank you to IHD for that. I want to make the argument that, and it's kind of almost trite now to say that climate change is a game changer, but I really think it is. And I want to highlight what I think is a kind of really important issue for South-South collaboration by trying to link the question of climate change with the issue of growth and kind of industrialization. And I want to do it, since we're kind of in a UN panel, by raising a slight discomfort that I have. It's not a contradiction, but I think there's a tension between SDG 13, which makes a set of commitments around climate change, and SDG 8. What SDG 8 says is that countries of the world can grow and can kind of reach a higher level of economic development, essentially through industrialization. The path that we've known to growth has been industrialization, and I think India's kind of recent experience is proof of that. What climate change does is, I think, close off the kind of options for all of the developing countries to follow that path. This path that kind of economists call structural transformation has been a key part of how we've seen this development process. If you look at the numbers on this, if each one of the underdeveloped countries follows that path, we will dramatically pass the goals that we've set for kind of reducing kind of emissions of carbon. And that raises the question: how are the countries that haven't industrialized, how are they going to grow, and how is the global South going to model out and put up an imaginary for how this process could work so that we can meet the goals of climate change, but also allow kind of development to take place. And my sense is, if you look at the evidence, we don't have a good story. Let me just give you two kind of illustrations of that. So what the EU is about to do is to introduce their carbon border adjustment mechanism. What that essentially means is that they're going to impose a tax at the border on any imports that have large amounts of carbon. Think about the contradictions of that. What the EU's done is to industrialize and grow on the basis of passing on the burdens to us, and will now impose a tax on any any exports from the south that have a large amount of carbon. That's one kind of example to illustrate it. Let's take another quick example. For those of you who follow the COPs, you'll know that at COP28, there was a huge amount of fanfare about the amount of finance that has been raised for the loss and damaged parts of the climate negotiations, and a large amount of media that what we've raised is $400 million for loss and damage. That sounds like a large amount. It's in fact 0.02% of the estimate of what is required for climate change to happen in a fair way. Contrast that, $400 million for loss and damage. Contrast that with the quantity of the Inflation Act that the US has introduced to kind of ensure that it emerges out of the climate change kind of adjustment process with all of its strengths kind of in place. The estimate of the cost of the Inflation Act is $800 billion. So I think there's a huge agenda for countries in the global south to really unpack this issue. And I think we have a great opportunity in that kind of the G20's just been passed on to Brazil. It's going to be passed on to South Africa. And I think for the first time we have 4 years where we can actually change this narrative, which I think is really, really important for South-South collaboration.
Thank you. Thanks, Imran. I think we are running out of time. Before I request Radhika to make whatever announcements, let me invite Dr. Alak Sharma for some closing remarks for the session. We don't have time for question answer session, but let's hear Alak Sharma.
Thanks very much to the panelists, chair, and all of you for participating in this panel. When the idea of this panel came from Radhika and we discussed, and then I discussed with Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi, I gave a very broad topic, suggested, and they agreed. I was skeptical a little bit that given the short time, 1 hour and 30 minutes, it won't go well. But surprisingly, it went well. Several good points came on which we can work further.
an important point which came, and Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi pointed out, differences within the global south. But it is a strength for learning from each other. You need not, of course, we need to learn from the history of developed country about the development process, history of development, but from the levels of development of the various southern countries, you can learn a lot. The idea came about policy innovation from Ajita. Of course, several policy innovations here, this digital infrastructure, and NREGA, Brazil, this conditional cash transfer, very well known. Inequality came, informality came, and finally my friend Imran talked about climate change. So we can work on all these topics, but and take it forward. One thing before closing, I would say that we have been, ISD has been working, and he said that 12 years in the life of, 50% of the ISD life, we have been collaborating with Southern Center for Inequality Study. Similarly, in Brazil, South Asia, Asia, several networks ISD had built. Probably most of you do not know. A history of ISD will be given to you after 2 days. You will come to know. So we have done several works. We published a book called Human Development in Global South 10 years back. Emerging Employment and Social Protection Aligning Policies in BRICS Countries, edited by Jerry Rogers, our visiting professor, some 10 years back. So many things, and we are, so the challenge is, and I would request the Additional Secretary, Madam Joshi, to take it forward. You can do a lot of things, cooperation between social scientists. And one area called labor and employment, that is used, and social sciences, climate change and all things. So the group of social scientists, or many other people have come, they can take it forward, and they take the agenda. We can learn, India can learn, other countries can learn. So it is a huge agenda, and I hope that United Nations will take it forward. Radhika will mobilize some money to help us to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Palak Sharma. I think good that you mentioned about resources, but I think one important point you have made is in terms of divergence and also a diversity in development strategy that Asian countries have adopted. And I think those who haven't seen Resurgent Asia must see by Professor Deepak Nair that revisits Gunnar Myrdal's idea of Asian drama, how it is panning out now, the divergent strategies, the strength, I think all are evident. So you are absolutely right, Professor Alak Sharma, in terms of emphasizing the diversity in strategy that we see in Asia, China, India, all. And that, I think you are right, gives us opportunity to leverage complementarities that exist in the region. So without further ado, let me now hand it back to Radhika with exactly the time that was meant for us. So I think a big hand for my panel for helping me manage time. And back to you, Radhika.
Thank you. I won't want to add much more, except that sort of emerging out of the G20 last year and coming out this year, starting with this panel and the whole discussion on South-South cooperation, of course, our commitment, at least for the UN, to work with the government and encourage South-South, promote South-South cooperation, including India's examples for acceleration of SDGs. We are on very firm footing, and it's a very good start to a new year. And we all look forward. I see many heads of agencies in the room and many distinguished people in the room. And we are sorry we didn't have time for this discussion, but you're very warmly invited for dinner across the road at the UN House. Please come with your ID card. Sorry, we need that for security. And we have made enough provision for the room to be, for the lawns to be heated. So please come and join us for dinner and conversations, which will take this discussion forward. And we have our colleague here from the IHD social media team who's asking the panelists for some short bites after this. So with that, a big thank you, and 7:30 we look forward to seeing you across the road at the Your House. Thank you. And thank you IHD and RIS.
Yes, thank you, Radhika. We have 15 minutes tea break, and then we are back for a very important lecture today. So we can have a